Everyone, Mrs. Wodomski here. I'm going to show you how to sew on your first object, which in this project I want it to be a letter from your name. You can choose either your first initial or your last initial. I don't care. I'm going to do a W for this project. You're going to need a new piece of fabric. It needs to be different than your 8x8 square. And you are going to cut out this new pattern for the letter from the new fabric. Okay, a couple of things first. These patterns are over with the sewing materials table, so you can pick up a pattern for a letter. There are some that are not cut out. You should cut them out first and then make them this way so that you can cut the fabric, so you're not cutting the shears, using the shears to cut the paper. Okay. If you want to design your own font, you have to have it be bigger than 2 inches by 2 inches. So it has to be a pretty big pattern to use to make that letter. Just easier to sew if you have a bigger letter. Okay, so you're going to finish your button first. And I'm going to pretend my button is right here because it was attached. I just took it off. Once I've got my button finished, then I'm going to do this next step. So my 8x8 square is going to set down for right now. I'm going to have the new fabric, my pattern for my letter, and my 4 pins. Now I have my pattern pinned to my new fabric. You want to use all 4 pins to hold it in place because it's going to make it easier to cut. So now you're going to cut this out of the fabric. I have my letter cut out of the new fabric. You'll notice that mine's different. That's because I had already pre-cut this out of this fabric because I really like this fabric. So this is what I'm going to be sewing onto my project. You are going to select a spot on your 8x8 square, somewhere that's not near one of the edges. I would suggest putting it somewhere in the center to one side so that you can put one here and then you can put the other one here so that you have your 2 objects attached. So now I've used my 4 pins to pin the W onto the 8x8 square. So now I can begin sewing. I need my threaded needle for this. A couple of reminders about threading your needle. You only need an arm's length. So when you're measuring the thread, it should only be as long as your arm. You only can work with this much space. So you should not be using anything longer than your arm's length. Use a double strand so we're not ever tying at the needle. Always tie at the opposite end of the needle so that you have all of this length to use to do your sewing. Okay? Very important when you are going to sew on this letter, you're going to start on the ugly side, which is the back. That's the side where I don't see the W. And I'm going to put the needle through both fabrics. Now, before I push the needle all the way through, I want to make sure that I'm going through both. And you can see that mine is flapping up like that. I want to pull the needle back down and make sure that I get through both the fabric and the initial. Now I can push the needle all the way through. Very important. We are doing something called the running stitch. The running stitch is a parallel stitch that creates a dotted line all the way around the entire outside of your letter. So you're going to push the needle back through very close to your initial stitch, as close as you can get it. If it snags, just loosen it up. That's why we don't pull fast, so that you create a stitch. Now that is 1 stitch. I'm going to go back through that time. I didn't go through both, so I want to make sure that I'm coming up through both. So I'm going to go back down to create the stitch. Okay, now a couple of things. I'm sort of messing up on this, so I want you to pay attention so that you do not do the same thing. I want to follow this entire length, so I'm going to pause and I'm going to do a couple so I can show you what they look like, but now you know what the process is. Okay, so here are some stitches that I've done, so you can see they're very neat, even, they're very close to the edge. They're supposed to be as close together as you can get them, so take your time, make a nice line that goes across here. You should have all of these stitches. Now, I have my, I'm going to put my thumbnail here. You should get 3 stitches at least in the width of your thumbnail. So you can see across my thumb, you can see 1, 2, 3, almost 4 stitches. They're supposed to be really small. So take your time, do as much as you can within the period, but you should be trying to get between 3 and 4 stitches in the width of your thumbnail to use as a guide. That way you're going to get a really good grade for this. You're going to continue to go because you'll see that I'm right next to the edge of this. I have to go all the way around the entire outside of this letter. Think about it if you were creating a bubble letter and you were doing it with a dashed line. That's basically what you're doing. I'm going to keep going to get to the next part. Okay, so now you can see how much I've done. This was with 1 arm's length of thread. So I've gone all the way around this entire thing, which is what you are supposed to do. Now, some of you are going to think that 1 arm's length of thread is going to be enough to sew on your letter. It's not. You're going to have to stop. So let me show you the rule that we follow. When you have needle's length and a half left, so you can see sticking out of my fabric, I have about a needle's length and a half, I have to stop and end my stitch. Otherwise, I'm going to run out of thread and I'm not going to be able to end my stitch, which we know when you don't end your stitch, you're going to have the stitches come apart, which is basically pointless of sewing. So, what's nice about this is you can go to your very last stitch, which I can't see mine because they're white, so I'm going to go right here next to where it is. And I'm going to insert the needle through the fabric. I'm going to check on the front to make sure that I can't see the needle. If you can see any kind of silver or you can see any kind of shiny material, that means you can see your needle. You need to do it again. If you don't, then you're going to take the thread and you're going to go underneath the tip of the needle, and then you're going to push the needle through, and that's going to create a knot right here. I always do it twice, so I'm going to go right underneath my last stitch. See how the needle's right underneath the last stitch? Now I'm going to slide the thread underneath, pull the needle through, so I create that little loop. Now it's tied. I'm going to take a pair of scissors shears. I'm going to cut it. So now all of those stitches are secured because I have a knot on this side preventing the stitches from coming undone. So you need to do that. Now you're going to rethread your needle because now you don't have any thread. Okay, so I've rethreaded my needle. Now I have a new length. I'm going to start again right where I left off. So I'm going to pick up right with this spot right here. I'm going to go as close to my last stitch as I can. I'm going to come up through both. Make sure you're getting through both fabric and letter. Push the needle through, and I'm just going to start again. I'm going to keep going, and I'll show you the end result. Okay, while I continue to sew, I keep thinking of things. Number one, I'm using contrasting thread color because I want you to see my stitches as I'm doing this. You don't have to use contrasting color. You could use the same color as your thread. So if you, for instance, me having this fabric be like purple, green, and purple or blue, I could choose any of those colors of threads and you wouldn't see the stitches, or you would see them minimally. So it's up to you if you want to do that or not. Another thing with the sewing that I thought of, you should hold this as flat as possible. You do not want your stitches to bunch up like this. That's going to get you a lower grade on the project. So if for some reason they start to do that when you're working, all you have to do is just slowly straighten them out or iron them out with your finger. Okay, and that's going to flatten them out so that they stay flat and far away from each other. Okay, so you can just keep going and sewing all the way around. I'm about a little over halfway done now. I'm going to keep going until I get all the way around the W. Okay, quick, let's review. What is the number of stitches that should be in the width of your thumbnail to ensure that you're getting very small, neat, even stitches? Everybody yell it out. Hope you all yelled out 3 because that's how many you're supposed to have. Seat 17. What is this stitch called that I am doing? If you answered running stitch, you are correct. Seat 12. Where should you start your stitches? On the front or back of the fabric? If you said back of the fabric, you are correct. Seat 14. Should your stitches be small, even, and close together? If you said yes, you are correct. Now, my stitches are a little bit messy. You should definitely take your time and make them all as similar as possible, and you should definitely try to get them as close to the edge as possible. You can see right here on the middle of my W, it kind of rushed a little bit, and I didn't go all the way up to the edge. You should definitely do that because this is potential to be ripped off, especially if I'm using a piece of clothing, or I'm fixing a piece of clothing that I'm going to wear a lot. I don't want to have anything like that happening. Seat 2. Do I have to use the same color thread as my fabric? If you said no, you are correct. You can use contrasting color like I did. It's up to you to decide which one you would prefer to do. Now, I have gone all the way around my entire W, so the entire thing has now that running stitch going around it. This is what yours should look like. It should have these stitches going all the way around. Like I said, it's almost like you bubbled in the W, or in your letter, using a dashed line. Don't forget to end your stitch on the back. I'm going to review that really quick. Make sure that you have needle's length and a half to work with. Now, I only had to rethread my needle twice. Some of you, depending on how big your letter is, you may have to rethread your needle several times in order to make sure that you are finishing the entire thing. So don't be afraid if you have to rethread your needle a couple of times. That just means that you're making really good stitches. So make sure that you are taking your time and doing a good job. I ended my stitch twice, so it's wrapped up nice and tight. I'm going to cut the thread off so that my needle is not attached. Remember to store your needle in your fabric like so. Stick it through the fabric so that it stays in place. I can leave my pins in there for now because now I have this shape attached, and this is what I want you to work on and have done as soon as possible. We are going to do a second object, and I have another video for that I will show you on either Tuesday or Wednesday, the next time I see you. So go ahead and work on your project. Thanks for watching.